Greetings, it's another Claymore video. I've made a couple already, so if you want to watch them chronologically, there's a playlist somewhere on screen and in the description. Okay, I'm gonna begin talking and won't stop for a while, so prepare your butts. Claire continues her flash sword training with Irene, and after a quick dip is given Ipene's old tracksuit and an apple. Eating, too, is part of training. Claire takes the opportunity to comment on how Irene hasn't aged, which eventually sparks conversation of Teresa. Eileen coldly states that Claire probably aided in Teresa's beheading by softening her heart. This is objectively true, and Irene continues, reassuring Claire that it is the objective truth, that Teresa was also happy. The time they spent together was a peace she hadn't ever known, and more importantly, very human. Anyway, Ol' One Eye is close by, and Claire is now aware of her limits. Apparently, the flash sword technique requires a firm and logical mind, that which Claire doesn't really have the capacity for achieving. Even her speed and strength are lacking. Despite the futility of her efforts, some progress is progress, I guess. Irene decides to perform a non-consensual biomechanical limb transplant as a farewell gift, casually popping off her arm and insisting that Claire has more use for it than her. Later, she wistfully stares into the moonlight after seeing her dumb student off. Suddenly, Rafaela, number 5, appears before Irene, prepared to perform an execution. Before being slain, Irene inquires about Rafaela's mongoloid strength and gaping eye wound, but doesn't receive an answer. Meanwhile, Claire's new bionic arm throbs nervously. The trees begin to quake, heralding the coming of Ophelia, who has become a serpentine titty alien. She doesn't seem aware of her transformation yet, and yearns for guts regardless. The battle begins, but Claire has evolved since last time. Claire's fleshy exterior tastes gross, but there isn't really anyone else around this forest to devour, so Oppenheimer channels her predatory instinct to drown Claire. Fortunately, she sees her own reflection in the water and has a mental breakdown, blaming probably Priscilla in some tangential protest. Her lamentations allow Clark to utilize her new moveset and escape Ophelia's grasp, though. This surprises Okra, who obtains a few butt spikes and attacks to limited success. Claire introduces herself once again as number 47, inheritor of both Teresa and Irene's bits, and the one who will slay that one-horned freak, Priscilla. She apologizes for having to also slay Ophelia, then reaches Mach speed for the first time ever. Irene's arm decides that it didn't like that so much, and begins to rebel. Ophelia catches on to this, teases Claire Mimas for resembling a patchwork quilt, then poops out a smaller version of herself after some distasteful wiggling. She proposes a game to Claire, slice through her ghastly snake body with the flash sword and cut her down, or fail to maintain her strength and be destroyed. Typical Ophelia and her silly little games. However, Claire begins, despite the more reasonable option being to beeline to Ophelia's supple human offshoot. Ophelia inwardly reiterates this fact, then questions her desperation, recalling a fragment of her past, the phantom of her heroic brother, who through his courage sacrificed his life to save Ophelia. She ultimately finds this bravery to be plainly annoying, spiking Claire with her yomatic spaghetti. Ophelia scolds Claire for falling so easily to her whack moves, offhandedly inspiring her foe greatly. Her counterintuitive encouragement also confuses herself and causes Claire to hasten the shredding, at last leading to victory. Ophelia once more berates Claire for being so brash, then submits to her defeat, falling into death's caress after recalling the smile her brother gave upon seeing his sister to safety. Somewhere in a miserable hellscape, the Hasidic diamond merchant ominously looks deeply into the audience. Within their dank lair, the Council of Elderly lament their inability to kill off Claire, discussing the recent awakening and abrupt slaying of Ophelia. As a solution to their issue, Mr. Ermita is called together, her, causing Orsay to monologue briefly. This must be her. Somewhere in a village, Claire has since obtained a new drip and begins her search for Raki. Using her Yoma powers to deepen her voice to pose as a man, she asks around town for her little brother. After securing an inn, and upon receiving her complimentary din-din, Claire is informed of the town's drama. A group of 4 Claymores have been dispatched due to a powerful Yoma inhabiting the mountains nearby. This implies an awakened being. Only 3 beings remain, and with so many Claymores so close, the chair isn't keen on remaining long. She narratively witnesses the parade of warriors to accentuate the dire circumstances, and is narrowly detected by the single digit amongst them. The next day, the Claymores have thankfully departed, and Claire continues her harassment of the natives. Meanwhile, said Claymores encounter the Yoma's malevolent dildo stash and begin to contemplate what heinous sodomy must have befallen these accursed hallways. Back in town, some little boogers celebrate the statues of Teresa and Clare, the pure twin goddesses of love, which spawned Teresa's naming scheme. For some reason, they begin to bicker, revealing that a passing bedraggled fella was curious about Clare. He was elated to hear about the goddess, which probably means that the sordid gentleman was Raki. Unfortunately, this event was 10 days past, which prompts Clare to hallucinate briefly and ignore the kiddo's dialogue options. In conjunction to this, Raki once more struggles through a dust storm, determined to find his girl. Suddenly, screams echo through town as a Claymore full of holes stumbles through the gate. She loses most of her juice after being grabbed by Clare, who gets the gist of the situation from the dying woman. Despite having distanced herself from the organization at this point, Clare feels the obligation to rescue her comrades in arms and departs to the mountains. A new dingus is added to the pile, which happens to be lodged inside of one of the warriors. The Yomas are experimenting with the punitive force by sodomizing them till they awaken. This one is unable to resist the process and throbs into metamorphosis. The meatball called Duff throbs into his own metamorphosis. To begin the assessment of the freshly awakened, she is only a dirty puddle amongst glistening rapids, however, and is turned into sauce for being inferior. Number 9, Jean, is teased for not awakening. Further down the mountain, Clare is accosted by a group of Yoma, who are immediately cut down in swathes. Their uncharacteristic knowledge of Claymores surprises Clare, who doesn't wait around to retrieve more information. After sensing the disappearance of her goons, the awakened under siege casually sends her precious meatball forth to engage in despoliation. Upon entering the profane hollow, Clare senses a troubling yoki and begins fondling one of the vile shillelaghs. It throbs menacingly. Suddenly, Clare is ambushed, but isn't easily deterred, traipsing directly into Megafist, the Pole Lord, who explodes a goober. He is confused by Clare's heterogeny shortly after, decides that it doesn't matter, then finds that he can't move within the confines of this cavern. Scare takes advantage, but struggles to slice through her opponent's stout exoskeleton. Even his eyelids pose a formidable foe. Clare is shook, abandoning her blade temporarily to lure Duff into a trap. Meanwhile, the awakened one reveals her plans to collect allies, earnestly explaining that the fine line between Claymore and Yoma is simply determined by which side the individual consciously decides on. Jean remains determined not to transform, though. Back at the fierce contest of strength, Clare's flash sword hasn't done much, and she gets her legs obliterated like an industrial-sized bad dragon through a Dorito factory. Suddenly, her arrives. It's the number 3, Galatea, here for Clare's toaster strudels. Despite things looking rather heated here, Glacier scoops up the shattered chair and slowly retreats, using her mysterious powers to deflect any unwanted projectiles on the way out. Almost as if she was waiting for it to happen, her path is blocked, and Duffy the Girl Crusher is peeved. Galatea scolds Clare for finding such an impossible battle, referring to the awakened being below them, then gets to scolding the meatball for being such a blustering poop goblin. She tickles his carapace, briefly as a test, then wriggles her blade through the tiny gaps in Duff's armor, while using her telepathy nonsense to manipulate his movements. Clare reflects on this. Witnessing her goon's pathetic defeat, the awakened one makes her appearance to instruct her meathead boyfriend on how to properly attack Galatea. Gonorrhea has the ability to manipulate others' yoki to a certain extent, so if Duff attacks with all his collected willpower, she can't do anything about it. This simple change of tactics sways the tide of battle. However, Clare does her thing by awakening again. Irene's arm doesn't appreciate this, but Galatea helps it settle down some, after which she connects the dots on why the organization is out to get Clare. Their discussion is temporarily interrupted by the awakened's disgustingly massive yoki, then pivots towards a history lesson on the 3 most powerful awakened beings, former number 1 Claymores, who split up territory in the cardinal directions, north, south, and west, then never appeared again. The organization labeled them Dwellers of the Deep and just ignored them. This one here is Ritful of the West. Clare is shook. Gallbladder begins to inquire about Rightful's movements and questions why the other two have begun to gather allies as well. Rightful candidly responds by stating that the northern dweller recently recruited a one-horned woman he found rampaging around the countryside, Priscilla. So Ritful was bored and figured she'd do something too. Clare activates her high beams in fury, desperately inquiring about Priscilla's location. Ritful agrees to tell, only if she can land a single hit. So Clare attempts a few times, but gets caught up in an elongated siege with Duff. She manages to break through his defense by exceeding her limits again, but is stopped short by Galatea, who firmly restrains her and explains that rushing headfirst into battle is a silly thing to do. Anyway, they should probably whack the meatball first, before the Dweller becomes keen on fighting back. To do this, Galatea states that they need more power, specifically from number 9, who is currently going through it downstairs. Galatea gives Clare the responsibility to check up on her, maybe give her a Snickers or the sweet release of death, depending on the situation. Galatea attacks, beginning the beginning of the end of this battle. Here's Jean. Galatea throbs into her final form, releasing her Yoki and proclaiming that her full power level exceeds the current rank 1. In the basement, Clare finds Bream has stunk up the whole room. Unfortunately for the Claymores, number 9 has become a sexy moth. She begs for death, however, meaning her mind has been spared from fully awakening for now. Clare prepares to strike her down, but in the spur of the moment, decides to talk Jean away from the precipice, encouraging her to revert back. This doesn't appear to work too well, but Germ explodes, returning to human form as a half-awakened. Clare had used Galatea's technique to guide Heem's Yoki to stability. Anyway, they need John's help fighting the Dweller and get going. Galatea has already boarded the struggle bus, but Clare and Jean arrive just in time to elongate the battle. They spare a few minutes to formulate a plan focused on Jean's superior firepower and engage. Galatea and Clare distract Duff with minor flesh wounds as number 9 charges up her gross flesh cannon. With her move prepared, Dolph is pinned in place by the homies, but breaks free from their grasp before Jean can unleash her Bankai. She manages to inflict significant damage despite the big guy's flailing, though ultimately is reacquainted with the floor, with the others. The Dweller is enamored by the Claymore's teamwork, as Duff laments the loss of both his hands. Clare has stood up though, calling out to Jean, who is also up for a fight I guess. With one shoe remaining, Clare recites a fairly basic battle plan, then lunges forth to begin Distraction Mark II. Ritful commentates the spectacle, specifically mentioning that Pear's current fighting style is conducive to an abrupt awakening. As a half-awakened already, this doesn't really matter to her, but regardless, Clare is fused with the ceiling. Fortunately, she bought enough time for Jean to reform her twisted meat rifle. Clare returns from pulverization to make a couple final acts of defense, causing her new homie to state that her life belongs to Clare now, and launch the ham torpedo. Cher channels her Yoki into Irene's berserk arm to expertly guard Jean's advance towards Duff, which goes pretty well. Of course, the Dweller isn't simply going to watch her idiot husband be obliterated, so wraps Jean up in a blanket of electrical tape. Clare doesn't appreciate this and attacks, landing the strike needed to win the information on Priscilla. Ritful clearly let her do this, then evolves into a towering hairball. As promised, the Dweller reveals that in the northern lands of Alphonse, sealed away by snow and ice, the Silver King easily resides. She then attempts to recruit Clare and evaporates into a little sky hole. Blair falls to her knees, agonizing about the insurmountable power of the Supreme Awakened. Anyway, Galatea returns to her original quest to drag Clare back to the organization, but Clare isn't keen on abiding. Jean isn't keen on abiding either, having already decided to give her life to her savior. The prospective combatants look at each other for a million years, then Goober folds, stating that there's no chance that a couple of low-ranked warriors could have survived an encounter with the Dweller. She wishes them well until they meet again, unknowing of whether they will be friend or foe next time, then departs. Meanwhile, beyond a torrent of hellacious weather, a group of Claymores is ripped apart by a pack of Yomers, still shoeless. Clare is followed by Jean, who has no intention of leaving her side until repaying her life debt. She already has though. Thanks to Jeep, Clarometer has succeeded in taming Iokane's ferocious arm. Jean's feat of separating mind and body inspired Clare to approach her method of controlling Yoki differently. Suddenly, her handler, who is named Raffle, appears. The handlers must be a series of pentuplets or something. Rank 5, Raffaella also appears from the darkness. Raffle goes on to explain how it was pretty obvious Galatea was lying, so they reprimanded her thoroughly and sent her on a dangerous mission. Speaking of which, Clare is assigned one of her own, to head to the northern lands in aid of number 7, who has struggled to slay a group of awakened beings. Clare and Jean are shook, but this isn't totally surprising, having delivered the quest and made sure the pair is aware that they are easily retract, Raffle begins to depart, snidely commenting that Raki was spotted traveling north as well. Clare is shook, and the organization's invisible hand quietly fades into the forest. Probably a while later, the enormous army of Claymores gather in the north. Suddenly, Clare is greeted by her old homies, Helen and Deneve, who are just as concerned about ranking and eager to pick fights, as always. After sorting things out and introducing each other, the second in command of the mission, number 8, Flora, emerges to brief the warriors. She's cut short by Helen, who brings up ranking again, prompting the introduction of their leader, number 6, the Phantom Miria. Her presence startles the plebs, and she informs the battalion of their mission to exterminate the many awakened beings lurking around. The others don't seem to believe that the awakened are capable of working together, but this absolute unit of Claymore reminds them all that it's their job to beat the sauce out of Yoma. It's number 11, Undine, who distinguishes herself by using 2 swords. Deneve makes fun of her for being afflicted with chronic jello brain and incites a verbal quarrel. Floral ceases the ruckus with her samurai moves. Then the top warriors are split into 5 captains, who will all form groups of 5 warriors each. They have no special strategy, but 1 team per awakened is standard practice. After this discussion, Miria assigns the Claymores to their squads. Later, Clare visits the Alliance of Half-Awakened for a traditional cave reunion. They cross blades as a greeting, but one other has followed, Jean, who is part of the gang now. Anyway, they briefly discuss Clare's new arm, but she keeps Irene's relation under wraps, then redirects the conversation to the mission, asking about the probability of success. Miria frankly states that they're all essentially dead walking, due to the presence of the Silver King, Dweller of the Deep, easily. Helen is peeved at being sent to their doom, but she should be used to this by now. Miria figures the organization wants to use them to buy time, to come up with some other plan. As they continue discussing, a forward recon of Yoma approaches town. One of them gets a little froggy and hops into action, startling the citizens by blending them up. However, 24 Claymores is quite a lot. The Yoma is elated to see so many ladies gathered in one place, as Miria barks orders, not incredibly keen on getting involved due to originally being a reconnaissance team. The drugged-out wizard and bald stoic calmly assess the Claymore's tactics from the rooftop. The battle commences, and Flora takes the opportunity to impose a sneak attack on the wizard, who performs a similar action as Galatea by syncing Yoki with his foes. He begins to puppeteer one of them into slaying Flora. However, Clare intervenes by flashing her Irene, surprising everyone present. Flora then accidentally creates a nudist, who finally decides to transform. Meanwhile, Jean's group is struggling against the bald stoic, who is now a spider. Thankfully, some well-timed homies intrude on all of the battles, as the turtle wizard shoots his rope everywhere. Half of the soldiers are removed from the battle as a result, and receive rebuke from Undine, who, alongside foliage, descend upon the turtle. Underwear is brimming with zeal, and overextends, leading to her nearly being decapitated by her own blades. However, Undine uses her brutish strength to change the trajectory of its attacks, resist the counter to her counter, then unleash a counter to his counter's counter. Unfortunately, Undo is still unable to fully withstand the turtle's fiendish puppetry, and is run through in several places. Clare and Dave take the offensive in Undine's place, sending her sprawling backwards so she doesn't accidentally die horribly to a turtle. Meanwhile, Jean is loading up her iconic meat cannon to blast the other Yoma. Clare and Denver are controlled, but this was to be expected, so they resist by awakening. This startles the others, of course. Jean also looks like she's going to awaken, which gives the spider confidence. Jort's underlings throw themselves uselessly against the Yoma in an effort to buy their captain time and give Helen the chance to display her prowess. Suddenly, the flesh missile is deployed, turning the spider into a dieter. These 2 Claymores are disgruntled with their primarily defensive role, but are happy to claim the killing blow. Back at the other fight, the half-awakening process is yielding an excellent result. The turtle fights back, but Deneve is almost immortal and able to power through her injuries to land a strike. Her blow is too shallow, however, and Undine shows up to help out, sending that chode flying, though only just the tip. He remains able to exercise control over others' Yoma and targets the little ones. Clare takes this opportunity to make a jigsaw puzzle out of the turtle's dome and impress Flora with her skill. Undine is dissatisfied with the lower ranks, huffing off as Helen and Deneve reunite. Suddenly, Clare remembers that Miria was fighting as a singular unit, but Deneve reminds her that the Phantom Miria is quite formidable, having ascended to another plane of unbridled power since they last fought together. It's true. Anyway, there are a couple of Claymores who are unable to fight, so Undine expresses her displeasure with Miria's tactics. The weaker Claymores should have taken up a supportive role rather than fighting beside the captains. This would result in fewer missteps and casualties during battle, and give the newbies ideas on how to fight Awakened when it becomes necessary. Her points are valid, but Flora defends Miria's harsh strategy by stating that there were no casualties, and those who hadn't fought Awakened before now have hands-on experience. In the case of this doomed expedition, making sure everyone is on the same page as quickly as possible was Miria's true goal. Either method is valid, but Undine is upset. Clare double-checks with Miria that this consequence was intended, and she reiterates that fighting hard is the only glimmer of hope they have. A slow pan brings Flora into the scene, implying that she heard all of that. Then a close-up of Clare looking into the crystalline stars facilitates her desire to find Raki, who is currently rummaging through a Claymore graveyard in search of his girl's emblem. He wanders through the desolate town, reflecting on the thoroughness of the Yoma in their destruction. Suddenly, he spots a skinny pleb about to be crushed by falling debris. Of course, Raki saves her, finding that he just molested a little girl. Her gallant guarantor arrives to see that his lady has been smelling another. She believes Raki smells nice, which piques the Guardian's curiosity, so he asks where Raki is from. Heralding from the south, Raki responds in kind, then asks if any monsters remain in town. There are none nearby at the very least, replies the suspicious fella. He invites Raki to join them due to his girl's Velcro-like attachment, extends his hand out to her, and beckons Priscilla to follow. Clare senses that Raki has interacted with another woman, and stares wistfully into the night sky. Raki and his merry band of perverts acquired horses from somewhere and prepare to journey south. Fellow travelers happen upon them and suggest that they stay away from the town of Pieta, in which the Claymore army is currently battling. Raki begins to vigorously froth, but he is reminded that Pieta is in a southerly direction anyway, so they could party up until then at the very least. Later, Priscilla's yearning for Raki's southerly smell has incapacitated her, and the guy who is probably easily inquires about his fixation on the Claymores. This causes Raki to vividly hallucinate visions of Clare and vow once again to protect her. This sudden, tragic confession gives the pretty boy the motivation to strip, steal Rocco's blade, and begin swinging around wildly, stating that impotence is a sin. This impresses Raki, who immediately asks to be trained in the art of swordsmanship, so Rakarini begins another training arc, as Clare once more wistfully gazes into the snow. Flora sneaks a peep at her from the shadows. Meanwhile, some of the lesser Claymores discuss the slough of despondency generated by the recent battle with the Awakened. Undine is jacked. She scolds the plebs for being so pathetic, then stomps off. Deneve defends her discourteous moves and decides to go check on the new equipment they've received, finding that Undine is already within, and peeved that Danny has the nerve to enter while a girl is changing. This seems trivial, so Deneve asks about Undiner's second blade. She plucked it off a corpse, but Deneve digs further, suggesting that despite Undine's uncouth manners, she appears to be especially sensitive about her fellow Claymore's health. Suddenly, Deneve enters the changing room to find that Undine is actually a sad little husk. There's the brief implication that Flora takes Clare aside for some conversation. Then Deneve uncovers her captain's intense fear of becoming awakened. This is understandable, but Undine is berated for being so fragile. Deneve points out that her situation isn't too uncommon amongst Claymores, reciting Undine's precise backstory. Undulation has no time to retort, as Helen begins to descend upon the equipment. She struggles to puff back up, but Deneve covers for her by distracting Helvetica. Afterwards, she brings in Undine's swords and delivers her own backstory, detailing the terror of watching a loved one being ripped apart and her continued fear of death. Dennis reiterates that it is human to be afraid, and to Claymores, being human isn't a weakness, but a power. To facilitate this point further, she expresses that they should look to each other as comrades if support is needed. Anyway, Flora brings Clare away from town to discuss her whack arm. She had recognized the flash sword, and menacingly questions Clare on how she acquired it, mentioning Irene's legend and her eagerness to test her wind cutter against it. Clare is silent. Suddenly, Bean shows up to defend her girl. Flora didn't express any killing intent, but still can't risk having someone holding such important secrets at this pivotal juncture in their battle against the Yoma, so threatens to kick the two from the stunt group. Clare immediately relinquishes the deets on Irene and states her desire to continue pursuing the head of the awakened being, Priscilla. Flora is shook, but understands, vowing to fight alongside her, no matter what. The three touch swords with mutual understanding. understanding. Undine re-enters the barracks and parts with some uncharacteristically caring words. This one is treated to an apple snack by Helen, who attempts to use food as an acceptable vice. This temporarily staves off the overwhelming dread, and Miria looks wistfully into the flurry of snow, allowing Clare to approach from stealth to incite Miria's dialogue. She is nervous about the upcoming battle, fully aware of the malignancy of the dwellers and the anxious stirring of her soldiers. Meanwhile, Raki trained so hard he can't move, easily reflects on the human condition. No matter how desperately they strive, the strength they obtain is pathetic. A visitor approaches, and so he goes to make contact. Rigardo, who has arrived to report on the state of Pieta. Iskit decides that now is the time to send all 27 of his goons to envelop the town in his name, annihilating every living being within. We are given a few stills of the prospective combatants, and that's the end of part 3 of Claymore. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, make a like or a subscribe. That'd be just great. I also have a Patreon in case you feel like feeding me, but I've been known to not eat for days at a time, so don't worry about it too much. Okay, thanks again. Bye.